Hello and welcome to Butterfield Trust Group's series of podcasts, comprising of leading specialists, academics and advisors who share their insights on some of the key topics and emerging trends impacting our clients today.
Today, we're focusing on women and wealth, in particular, opportunities for women advising other women, gaps in the market across different jurisdictions, and trends that we're seeing amongst our female clients. We've got an absolutely fabulous panel lined up today, and it's going to be moderated by Sarah Jane Parker, Client Services Director of Butterfield Trust in Guernsey. Our panellists include Sally Tennant, OBE of Acorn Capital Advisors, Sarah Von Schmidt of Farrer & Co, Kira Motley of Boodle Hatfield, and Beatrice Piotti of Burgess Salmon. Sarah Jane, over to you.
Well, as part of today's discussion, there are 4 questions which I'd like to ask each of our ladies here present this morning. And Sally, I think the first question that I'd like to ask you, if you wouldn't mind, is there a difference in how you advise female clients versus male clients in 2021?
Fundamentally, no, I don't think there is a difference. I think that the important thing when you're advising clients is to really listen well and to make no assumptions about anyone's knowledge or anyone's desires. And therefore, the discovery phase and the amount of time you spend understanding what people want their wealth to do is really important.
Would you say that working as a woman with a female client, that there's an added value system that is much more important to the female client? So they want to align their values with yours, with yours or your firm's, more so than perhaps working with a male client that may be potentially looking more at performance-driven data as opposed to that empathetic, value-driven system?
Again, it's hard to generalise, but yes, I think that women, when they're looking to their advisors, are a little bit more holistic in their approach and really want to feel that there's an identity over and beyond the performance of that money. Now, that identity could be around values. I think it can also be around making sure that it's a very safe place for them to be vulnerable, a really safe relationship where they can open up about what they know and don't know. To me, I think that is the key to it. I think, if I may add one thing that's also really interesting, is that a female advisor can identify with the multitasking that's involved in a female's life. You know, most people are a daughter, or we're all daughters. Some of us are blessed to be mothers. And it's the fact that you've got to juggle these different roles and compartmentalise is kind of easier with another woman, I think. I don't know if others share that.
I agree with that, Sally. I agree fundamentally about the fact that actually we're just looking at people and different personality types, and not just down gender lines. I think that that's very true. But I also agree that people can open up more and build a strong relationship with their trusted advisors if those values are aligned. They want you to be an expert and they want you to deliver clear advice, but particularly in a crisis. And those of us that are lawyers, we're often dealing with crises and really very upsetting things. And they want us to come up with a solution, but as Sally says, listen to where they need to get to, what we need to do, but also just to support them through it and to look at it and to really care, basically. And I'm not saying that our male colleagues don't care, because they do, but I just think that is a strength, that we can bring. And that is something which I think just comes naturally to us, probably because we've ended up in this area.
Yeah. So that actually leads quite nicely into the question that I was going to address to you, Sarah.
Yes.
Which is, how do you think women define a successful relationship with their trusted advisors?
I think that, it is about listening and trust. Sorry to repeat the word trust here. It is about them knowing that for you, the advisor, you do care about them, and it's more than just, this is a transaction. We are advisors. It is an advisory relationship. And I think that they would define success by sort of building up the sort of relationship often where, that things may be quiet for quite a long period of time because they don't always need their lawyers, and we always hope that our clients won't have crises, but they'll be able to pick up the phone and you've got that relationship. You know how their mind works, maybe some things have changed, but they pick things up with you and you're on the same wavelength. There's a bit of catching up to do, but then away you can go looking at whatever this new project may be. And I think that interest and sort of long-term relationship, which may go through sort of fallow periods and then come up again, I think that is probably what defines a number of women and other clients too, defines that successful professional relationship.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Bia, your turn now.
Which question?
I would like you to address the trends that you're seeing amongst your female clients.
I don't think there is one change is that I've seen more and more in the same way as there are more and more not enough senior people in our industry. There are more women that are actually the wealth makers more than they were when I started. Mm-hmm. And so when we were talking earlier about how you change, whether you are different, whether you're vice male and female, I agree with the gender thing, but actually there is also a cultural and nationality thing. I am an Italian working in England, and when I arrived and I did law again in this country, I didn't speak English. And now I do vaguely, but I'm still very, very different from my English colleagues in my firm. My partners take the mickey out of me all the time. And I'm not your standard British lawyer. So all I'm saying is that all of us and my clients, I do international work, are very, very different. One of my longest standing client is a lady, and is Latin American, and she's been my client for 25 years. And we've grown together. And I don't regard her as a client. She's my friend. I'd do anything. I would, and I drop everything when she needs anything. And I think you can have this type of relationship you can only have with a woman. Mm-hmm. So the trends that I see is that women are becoming more empowered in terms of taking responsibility of their wealth and what to do with it, and with that comes a very different. It isn't a very different approach. Again, you can have women who are risk takers, but on the whole, I agree with you. They are much more protective and they are much more considerate about what they do with their wealth. The philanthropic side, I see it both in women and men. I have to say, it is more about when the investments, I see them where they direct investment or they buy things. There is always a thought behind the scope of why they are doing it. There is much more thought about the objective that they want to achieve more than just the returns. So there is a much wider consideration. In terms of, there is a lot of protection of children, asset protection, and the mothers are much more conscious about the weight that the wealth will have on their children, as in the actual responsibility. And therefore there is more structuring. I see more structuring when I'm dealing with women. I do structuring for men, but they are very different reason and different type of structures. And then the conversation around wills and stuff. So the trend, I suppose, is I don't think there is a major difference in trends. I think is more the approach to what happens with the structuring and the thought process that is different.
And how would your approach differ, if any, actually, with regards to a woman who has made her wealth herself, so self-made, as opposed to a woman who's inherited her wealth and has lost a husband and is dealing with a situation which is very unfamiliar to them and potentially quite scary about working with a lawyer and a wealth advisor? And how would your approach, and actually I can open up the floor to all of you on this one, how would your approach differ in that regard?
I go through it all the time. I have divorcees And and my approach is, I always tell them, because they've been used to not dealing with it and delegating it to their partner a lot. And I make them pay attention, and I usually choose the wealth advisors that I know would do the same. And I do believe that in those situations, my role is not just technical, but it's just to empower this person to understand exactly what she's doing, why she's doing it, and pay attention and take responsibility. And that is an education path.
Yes.
It's very, very different, and is all in the hand. And this is where we are different, I think. I don't know what my colleagues, men tend to try to overtake. If they see somebody, they want to do it for them, when I think we don't. We walk along them and we say, this is how what do you want, ask questions. And I think that's the difference, don't you think?
I think people think I'm going to talk to a lawyer. That might be seen as a bit scary, or I have to go to the lawyer with a problem, or I think sometimes approaching a lawyer can be something that someone's got to overcome. It's a bit of a hurdle. So I would say I don't really see myself as a lawyer. I don't see a lot of the advice I give as a lawyer. I would describe myself more as the architect. I'm a sort of architect for somebody's life, for somebody's wealth, walking with them on that journey. And I think that's a very different way of providing legal advice, because it's not a lot of it isn't legal advice, it's just holistic advice, helping people, really, I would say, to not spend their life managing their wealth, but to spend their life enjoying their wealth. And I think a very good private wealth advisor can help someone who's male or female in that. And I think that's quite a different role as compared to just sort of being a lawyer.
I might jump in, yes, on that, because your question is really interesting about whether when you inherit wealth that you're not prepared for, and versus having made it. Time is something that's different between the two. Often a successful female entrepreneur actually doesn't have the time to worry about that stuff on the side, and it's put off. And they know they've got to deal with it, but it's not interesting and exciting. And to your point about making people actually spend a bit of time is really important. And it's the reverse. If you're divorced or widowed, often you have too much time, and your anxiety level and a sense of overwhelming, or of being overwhelmed, can rise. And I think the role that we play as advisors to this is to help somebody either focus on something that they don't want to, or not be overwhelmed by the jargon, the scariness of it. And that just takes time, and it's committing the time that I think is the key to both.
Kira, perhaps you can just give us some insight as to opportunities for women advising other women. And is there a gap? You alluded to, obviously, you working in the Middle East as a jurisdiction. But are there specific circumstances that would lead you to work differently with women in the Middle East, for instance, as your jurisdiction?
I think there's definitely a gap when it comes to the Middle East for women advising women. Even today, when I go out to the Middle East, people still say to me, who's gone with you? Who's chaperoned you? They expect me to have a male chaperone to go into Saudi, for example. I find that quite extraordinary.
Yeah. But historically, that was
historically the way
absolutely.
it was. But times have changed drastically, and I think people that don't go to the Middle East, they don't know the Middle East, they don't really realise how things have changed. If you were to wind back 10 years ago, there was really, I would say in my experience, less than 5% of women were actually going out to the Middle East and advising people in the region. And I think now women are still a minority in terms of private wealth advisors. It would be between, I think, 15-20% would be women, and the rest would be men. And you've got a lot of people, women, they don't go often to the business, to the office. They want to have meetings in the home. And there's a perception issue around inviting maybe an older man into the family home to sit with a lady privately and have a discussion. And in my experience, women can feel happier in the home if it's a another woman, and then that person's there. And they're also thinking about their daughters. Who's going to support their daughters? Who's going to support their grandchildren? And I think there is a real gap there for a female advisor. I do have a lot of clients as well that are men, and I find they choose a female advisor because when they're no longer around, they want someone that has that relationship with their wife, that has that relationship with their daughter, and can carry on that relationship through generations. So I think specifically for the Middle East, there's a real gap. Partly historically, there's just not people have been focusing on that market, but I also think that there is a demand for people for female advisors there. And there's also a lot of wealth being transitioned into the hands of women. Mm-hmm. You've got people, often men, generation 1, generation 2, made enormous amounts of wealth, billions, and then they're passing it down, and then their daughters are suddenly receiving huge amounts of money, and they're often unprepared for how to deal with that wealth, and they really need somebody to guide them through that as an architect, sort of A to Z.
Yes, I like your phraseology as an architect, because I think we can all sort of allude to similar things in what we provide as far as advice to our clients.
I think that an interesting point that you make is also just about the changing views of allowing the younger generation, whether it's the sons or the daughters, to become involved in, to understand the architecture, how things are structured, and how the family see their sort of the wealth passing down through the generations, and that's something where there are opportunities really for everybody to talk to that next generation, and you're not so much seeing a patriarch, although sometimes a matriarch, being very closed and not really sharing necessarily what their vision is, or listening to the next generation about what that vision might be. So I think that that's a really exciting and interesting area, and what is lovely and what we would have a problem with otherwise would be if the daughters were all shoved to one side and it was only the sons. I think that it's worth saying that, you know, it's great to be able to see everybody having a voice at the table.
It's really interesting that, just building on that, one of the trends that we've seen is that with the younger generation who've been well educated and outside of the Middle East, particularly in America, they're now in their 20s and 30s having a great influence on their family offices and the direction that they want to go in. And impact investing is now high up on the list, that whole responsible purposefulness. And what's really fantastic is the parents are responding to it. They really like it and are up for change. I don't know if you've seen that as well with your clients.
What I was going to say is that going back to the sort of woman client and the children and the next generation, what I find interesting is that if the client is a female, they are much more. I mean, I have never seen a woman client not wanting to have total equality amongst her children and descendants, and I have seen male client not doing so, and also the approach to what they do and the approach to who makes decisions. And the other thing is, on one side, I agree, there is a lot of family offices and families who involve the next generation, but actually I see a lot of reluctance too. I have a lot of clients who don't want. They are very, and I think the female clients, if they are the wealth makers or they are the wealth producers, are more about doing it slowly and educating the next generation. When if it is the males, they just say, here it is, you need to be successful like me, otherwise you're a failure. Very often. And I have to say, I see it, and that is culturally across the piece. So that is another difference when you are advising, when your client is a woman, the architecture can be much more complex but complete than when you're dealing with a man that just wants that building. and that building only will do.
I mean, it's the same thing. If you were building a house and you were the architect, the woman would spend a lot of time on the soft furnishings and what it's going to look like. Exactly as you said, the man would just be like, I just want that building. And, you know, it's just a different approach.
Yes, they're concerned with the bricks and mortar and the actual infrastructure more than the softer side of.
But no, it is. So talking about the next generation, I do think that, and I often spend a lot of time with my male client making sure that there is equality. I mean, I am quite bossy with my clients because if I don't agree with them, I do tell them. So, but I do try my best to help so that the children and the woman in the family are treated exactly the same, which is I think is another role we can fulfill.
Absolutely. And I think the next stage of our discussion is around some top tips which each of you can perhaps provide with your wealth of experience. Kira, perhaps I could start off with you as to what you would deem to be your top tips for working with women.
I think whether you're dealing with women or men, it's really important to keep things simple, jargon-free, simple, in a plain, easy to understand way. Mm-hmm. I don't think the advisor should have an ego. I see advisors with egos who like to make it all sound very, very complicated, and they're all terribly intelligent. But the intelligence is actually the ability to explain something in plain English in a way that people can understand. And I think that when people are picking advisors, they should pick advisors that have that skill, because not everybody has that. And I also think people, particularly women, shouldn't be ashamed or worried about saying, I don't understand that, or I need you to re-explain that, or that's a bit complicated, or can we go over that again? Because if you're on a journey, it's really important that all of that detail is fully understood. And it's taken people like us decades to learn what we have learned. So there's nothing that someone should feel they can't say to that advisor, please explain that really complicated thing to me again, because they probably just heard it for the first time. So that would be probably my top two. And then my third is, I think, imagine we were building a house from scratch and you're sitting with the architect. I think, again, it's the architect's job to make things manageable. So to break anything that you're doing down into different sections and different bite-sized chunks, each with their own timetable and their own mini projects, so that you can accomplish different projects and feel you've got a sense of accomplishment. Because I think if you look at a really big thing that you need to do with your wealth, it's global, you've got issues in 10 to 20 different jurisdictions, you've got complex family problems, complex tax problems, succession issues, it's really overwhelming. And so I think a real thing that's very important, particularly for women, is to break it down, make it manageable, bite-sized chunks, and then you accomplish things over time. And gradually 5 years will have passed and you will have done the project and you'll have a house. But you can't sit day one worrying about the fabric of the cushions on the sofa when you haven't dug the foundations.
You should have been an architect.
I should have.
I always say to people, before you go into anything, you decide what you want. Why? I have a lot of because one of my top tips was don't go into things you don't want just because people tell you it's good for you, and because there is a tendency of an advisor. I mean, a lot of the time I pick up new clients and they have something in place, and I say, why did you do that? I don't know. They told me I should, and so one thing, and people tend to do that to women more than they do to men. They try to push things under their nose. And one of my top tips is never to allow that to happen, and have the confidence to ask why and question, as you said, and to make sure. And with that goes, before you start a journey like this, and to do your plan, I think it is exactly what you were saying. I am a great believer that the understanding of what you want, what you can achieve, what you want to achieve, what is it that you want for yourself, your wealth, and your family is absolutely the basis of your building. Because you can't build anything unless you and the client are clear where you want to get to, and I think that is it goes hand in hand in knowing what you want to do.
That's a good message there. Sarah?
My top tip really links to what we've been talking about and what the others have said, and that is that there you can feel overwhelmed with a sort of a myriad of choices. You can be enthused and filled with good ideas for things that you want to achieve on your philanthropy or things that you want to invest in, and looking at ESG and all of that side of things. And you always say, you can find yourself saying, I'll just wait and find some more time to deal with this. And so it gets put on this sort of too difficult pile, or the tin can gets kicked down the road a little bit. So my top tip is to be brave and just take that first step, recognising that it is a journey, an oft-used phrase, but it is. And by taking that first step, whether that is saying, I'm just going to draft my will and update my letter of wishes, or talk to my trustees, or do this, because I just need to do that, and then I will tweak it. It's not set in stone. I'll see where things go. Or there are all these things that I want to do in the world of philanthropy because I've been lucky enough to inherit this money. But I don't have time. It's that perfectionist point. I don't have time. I should investigate all of this. And my advice would be just look at one strand. What's the most important strand? And maybe just take that first step around that bit as well. Or talk to your network and start building up your network, and just take your first step in around investments or whatever it might be. So I think that by taking that first step, particularly for people who are time poor, everybody is time poor, it can just free up that sort of logjam in your thinking sometimes, or just open up opportunities to build your network, get to know a few more people, and I do think that the sort of perfectionist tendencies can come to the fore in many people, but particularly in women, so that they are feeling, before I make this decision, I need to have thought it through to the nth degree. But as advisors who've worked with people for so many years, we know that none of us know what's around the corner. So we don't have a crystal ball. So we just need to take that first step and talk to lots of people, build up your networks. You'll probably have more than one trusted advisor, and that's great. Ask the questions and just step out onto that journey.
Do you think women generally are hard on themselves, in as much as, they sometimes don't have the confidence to believe in their own instincts? And, we were talking about the education process and, divorce situations and so forth. I mean, that obviously is a knock to your confidence, isn't it? And I think, myself as a woman, sometimes I don't necessarily believe in my own abilities and capabilities.
We don't like to wing it sometimes.
Exactly. And, it's the perfectionist aspect that I think we've all alluded to throughout our discussions this morning. And sometimes I think we're our own worst enemy.
And you asked a question earlier about how a woman would look at a successful relationship. For me, that's about the male or female feeling confident and in control. And to your point about the top tip and building it from the bottom up, but I do think actually you do need to begin with the end in mind, i.e., do you want a mansion? Do you want a cottage? Do you want a palace? And then combine the top down and bottom up. And we as architects in that journey kind of have to go through the options. So the top tip that I've learned over the years is really about untangling those complexities, and particularly around risk. Everyone wants to blind you with all these different risk measures and standard deviation, etc. It's not. It's about how sick do you feel when the markets collapse, how panicked, how uncomfortable are you, and trying to bottle that and really help somebody think that through when they've never had to think about it is so important, and that's what builds trust.
It's being able to sleep comfortably at night, knowing that somebody is looking after your hard-earned wealth.
It's also involved. I think it is in everybody's interest to make sure that everybody's involved. And sometimes when you see in a family the dynamics, often if the husband or the man is the businessman, they often don't see that they haven't involved their other half simply because they haven't got the time. It's not because they don't want to. So and I think it is important that you, as an advisor of the family, make them see that, so you help them with that.
As part of our discussions, we centred on various aspects which it would be useful to just highlight as part of our takeaways. The first being, no question is a stupid question. It's important to know your objectives, make the first step, make time, and don't let people push you into doing something that you neither want or understand. On behalf of everyone, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah Jane, particularly for those top tips. On behalf of Butterfield, I'd like to thank once again Sally Tennant, OBE of Acorn Capital Advisors, Sarah Von Schmidt of Farrer & Co, Kira Motley of Burdell Hatfield, and Beatrice Purity of Burgess Salmon. We can't wait to see you again soon.